You can't come to the party, Mom. Victoria would find you embarrassing. The words came through the phone receiver on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was standing at my kitchen island, a pen in my right hand, hovering over my checkbook. I had just finished writing the date. The check was meant to be for $15,000, a final deposit for the luxury catering company my daughter Sarah insisted she needed for her wedding. The house was quiet. Outside, a gentle breeze rustled the oak trees I had planted 20 years ago. Inside, the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator and my daughter's nervous breathing on the other end of the line. Embarrassing, I repeated. My voice was entirely flat. Don't take it the wrong way. Sarah rushed to explain, though her tone held no real apology. David's family is just different. Victoria is very high society. She serves on charity boards. You're you. You ran a landscaping business. You still have dirt under your fingernails half the time, and you don't know how to talk to these kinds of people? I just want everything to be perfect tonight. We're meeting her friends at the country club, and I can't afford any awkward moments. I looked down at my hands. They were strong hands. The skin was a little rough, weathered from decades of hard, honest work, alongside my late husband Arthur. We had built a life from the ground up so Sarah could have the comforts she now used to look down on me. I see, I replied. You're not mad, right? She asked. I'll come by tomorrow and we can have lunch. Just you and me. There's no need to explain, Sarah. I understand completely. Great, you're the best, Mom. I have to run to my fitting. Bye. The line went dead. I didn't cry. I didn't throw the phone. Instead, I calmly placed the receiver back on its cradle. I picked up the check I had just started writing, tore it neatly into 4 pieces, and dropped it into the trash can. I thought the disrespect ended there, but I had no idea what she was truly planning for that weekend. I am 64 years old. I have been a widow for 5 years. Arthur and I never had inherited wealth, but we had discipline. We worked 6 days a week, invested wisely, and lived below our means. Because of that, I own my 4-bedroom home in the suburbs outright, and I hold the clear deed to a beautiful custom-built cedar cabin on Lake Oconee. Sarah had always resented our lifestyle. Growing up, she hated the company truck in the driveway. She hated that we took camping trips instead of flying to resorts in Europe. When she met David Sterling, a junior investment banker with a trust fund and a mother who demanded perfection, Sarah morphed into someone I barely recognized. She began speaking with a clipped, breathy accent. She complained about the aesthetic of my living room. I let it go, assuming it was a phase. I offered to help pay for the wedding because she was my only child, but my patience had limits. Later that afternoon, I walked into the hallway to grab my gardening gloves. My eyes drifted to the wooden key rack by the front door. Arthur had carved it himself. There were 4 brass hooks. The 3rd hook, which always held the spare set of keys to the lake cabin, was empty. I paused, frowning. The keys had a heavy faded wooden boat keychain attached to them. They had been there yesterday morning. I pulled out my phone and checked my messages. Sarah had stopped by the house yesterday afternoon while I was out running errands. Her text read, "Stopped by to grab some old childhood photos for the wedding montage, locked the door behind me." She hadn't mentioned the cabin. She had no reason to go up there. It was a 2-hour drive into the mountains, and she hated the woods. I stared at the empty hook, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming she might have accidentally knocked them into her purse. But that evening, a message arrived that changed everything. Saturday night arrived. While Sarah was supposedly celebrating her engagement at an exclusive downtown venue with the Sterlings, I was sitting in my favorite armchair drinking a cup of chamomile tea and watching a documentary. I felt perfectly fine. I had learned long ago that forcing yourself into spaces where you aren't wanted only breeds misery. At 8:30, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text from my neighbor and old friend Helen. "Helen Phyllis, are you seeing this? My niece is waitressing at the Sterling party tonight. She just posted this on her Facebook." An image file followed. I tapped the screen to enlarge it. The photo was taken inside a brightly lit, opulent banquet room. Sarah and David were standing in the center, holding glasses of champagne. Beside them stood Victoria Sterling, a tall woman dripping in diamonds looking incredibly smug. But it wasn't the people that made my breath stop. It was the large, ornate easel set up behind them. Resting on the easel was a massive, professionally printed photograph of my lake cabin. The cedar siding, the wraparound porch Arthur built with his own 2 hands, the dock jutting out into the blue water. Across the top of the photo, elegant gold lettering read, "A generous wedding gift from the bride." Below it, smaller text proudly announced, "The new Sterling Family Summer Retreat." I zoomed in. Victoria had her hand resting possessively on the frame of the photograph. Sarah was smiling brightly, leaning into David. The pieces snapped together with terrifying precision. Sarah hadn't uninvited me because my hands were rough or my manners were blunt. She had uninvited me because if I had walked into that room, I would have seen the giant billboard announcing that she had just gifted my property to her future mother-in-law. She hadn't asked for the cabin. She hadn't bought it. She had stolen the spare keys from my hallway to hand over to Victoria tonight. Sarah hadn't just uninvited her mother. She had given away a house she didn't own. The realization settled over me like a heavy winter blanket. There was no panic, no hysteria. In my years of running a business, I had learned that reacting emotionally to a crisis is the fastest way to lose control of it. Sarah was using the cabin as a bribe. She knew the Sterlings valued real estate and prestige above all else. She wanted to secure her place in their family by proving she brought something substantial to the marriage. She took the keys so she could physically hand them to Victoria as a grand gesture in front of all their wealthy friends. I didn't call Sarah. I didn't send an angry text. A text can be ignored. A phone call can be hung up on. I set my teacup in the sink and walked into my home office. I unlocked the heavy steel filing cabinet in the corner. From the second drawer, I pulled out a thick manila folder labeled Lake Property. Inside was the original deed signed by Arthur and me, along with the most recent property tax bills, all firmly in my name. I folded the documents and placed them into my leather handbag. Next, I walked to my bedroom closet and pulled down a small overnight duffel. I packed a change of clothes, my toothbrush, and a heavy wool sweater. Finally, I went to my bedside table. From the top drawer, I retrieved the heavy brass master keys to the cabin. I checked my watch. It was just past 9. The party downtown would be winding down soon. The Sterlings loved to boast about their weekend getaways. I knew exactly where they would be heading first thing Sunday morning to inspect their new gift, and I fully planned to be there to welcome them. I put on my coat, locked the front door of my house, and climbed into my Ford truck. The drive up into the mountains took exactly 2 hours and 15 minutes. The roads were dark, winding through dense pine forests that felt miles away from the city. I kept the radio off, letting the steady hum of the engine focus my mind. When I finally pulled onto the gravel driveway of the cabin, the property was completely silent. The lake reflected the moonlight, smooth as glass. I parked my truck around the back, pulling it entirely into the detached garage so it wouldn't be visible from the main road. I walked up the wooden steps to the front porch. The familiar scent of cedar and damp earth grounded me. I slid my master key into the lock and pushed the door open. I didn't turn on the overhead lights. I used a small battery-operated lantern to navigate. The cabin was exactly as I had left it 3 weeks ago. I walked to the front door. Last year, Sarah had convinced me to install an electronic keypad on the handle, claiming it was more modern. I opened the back panel of the lock and quietly removed the batteries, rendering the keypad entirely dead. Then, I reached up and slid the heavy iron deadbolt into place. Arthur had forged it himself. It was a massive piece of metal that locked the door directly into the doorframe from the inside. Once it was thrown, no key, no code, and no amount of pushing could open that door from the outside. I did the same to the back door. I made a small pot of coffee in the kitchen, pouring it into Arthur's old thermos. I pulled a blanket over my shoulders, sat in the armchair facing the large glass windows that overlooked the driveway, and waited. Dawn slowly broke over the water, painting the sky in shades of gray and pale pink. At exactly 8:30, the crunch of tires on gravel signaled the arrival of a silver Mercedes SUV. I sat perfectly still, holding my coffee mug, watching through the glass. The Mercedes came to a halt near the porch. The driver's side door opened, and David stepped out wearing a cashmere sweater and a smug expression. He walked around to open the passenger door for his mother. Victoria Sterling stepped onto the gravel. She was dressed in a tailored cream trench coat and expensive leather boots that were entirely impractical for the woods. She pushed her designer sunglasses up into her hair and placed her hands on her hips, surveying the cabin like a general inspecting a conquered territory. From the back seat, Sarah emerged. She looked nervous but giddy, holding the keychain with the faded wooden boat. She pointed at the wraparound porch, her mouth moving quickly, as she explained something to Victoria. They walked up the wooden steps. I remained seated in the shadows. Sarah stepped up to the front door and confidently pressed her thumb against the electronic keypad. Nothing happened. The screen remained dark. She frowned, pressing the buttons harder. "Is there a problem, Sarah?" Victoria asked, her tone dripping with impatience. "Just a dead battery, Victoria. No big deal." Sarah said, her voice slightly shrill. "I have the physical key right here." She slid the stolen spare key into the lock. It clicked as the cylinder turned. Sarah grabbed the handle and pushed. The door didn't move. The iron deadbolt held it completely firm. Sarah pushed again, throwing her shoulder into the heavy wood. A look of genuine panic flashed across her face. She jiggled the handle violently. "Sarah, really?" Victoria sighed, crossing her arms. "I thought you said this place was ready for us." I set my coffee mug down on the side table. I stood up, smoothed the wrinkles from my jeans, and walked to the door. I grasped the iron deadbolt, slid it back with a loud, heavy clack, and threw the door open myself. The look on Sarah's face was worth the 2-hour drive in the dark. All the color instantly drained from her cheeks. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She stared at me as if I were a ghost rising from the floorboards. "Mom?" She finally whispered, her voice cracking. Victoria stepped forward, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. She took off her sunglasses, looking me up and down. I was wearing a simple flannel shirt, jeans, and work boots. I didn't look like a wealthy donor. I looked exactly like what I was. "Sarah, who is this?" Victoria demanded. "I thought you said the caretakers had moved out." "Caretaker." I repeated, my voice steady and clear. I smiled, though there was no warmth in it. I stepped out onto the porch, closing the door behind me, but keeping my hand firmly on the brass knob. I didn't look at Sarah. I looked directly into Victoria Sterling's eyes. "I am not a caretaker," I said calmly. "My name is Phyllis Andrews. I am Sarah's mother, and I am the sole legal owner of this property. My late husband and I built it 20 years ago." Victoria froze. Her eyes darted from me to Sarah, and then to the stolen keys trembling in Sarah's hand. "Your mother," Victoria said, her voice dropping an octave. "But Sarah told us she presented the deed at the party last night. She said this was a gift to the family." "I imagine she presented a printed photograph," I corrected mildly, "because the actual deed is in my purse inside, along with the property tax bills." I turned my gaze to my daughter. "Sarah, why are your guests trying to break into my house?" Victoria turned to Sarah, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. "Sarah, what is going on?" Sarah panicked. Her carefully constructed illusion was collapsing in real time, and she reverted to the tactics she had used since she was a teenager. She lunged forward, grabbing my forearm, trying to physically pull me back inside the cabin. "Mom, please," she hissed under her breath, her eyes wide and desperate. "Just come inside for a second. Let's talk about this. Just play along for 10 minutes, please. I'll explain everything. I'll make it right." I did not move. I planted my feet firmly on the wooden deck and pulled my arm out of her grasp with a sharp, decisive motion. I refused to lower my voice. I refused to let her hide her lies in whispers. "There is nothing to play along with, Sarah. I said, my voice echoing clearly over the quiet lake. You came to my home. You took my spare keys off the hook without asking. You told this family that this cabin was yours to give away. It is not. It has never been yours, and after today, it never will be. David stepped up onto the porch, his face flushed and angry mottled red. Sarah, did you lie to us? He demanded. Did you lie to my mother in front of all our friends? Sarah backed up against the railing, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. David, no, I knew she wasn't using it. I was going to ask her to transfer the deed she owes me. I owe you nothing, I said simply. I held out my hand, palm up. The keys, Sarah. Mom, you're ruining my life. She sobbed, clutching the keys to her chest. You ruined your own credibility, I replied. You were ashamed of me, so you uninvited me. But you weren't ashamed to steal what I built to buy their affection. The keys. Now. Victoria looked utterly humiliated, realizing she had spent the entire previous evening bragging to her high society friends about a stolen house. Victoria Sterling did not scream. She didn't throw a tantrum. Women like her consider loud arguments beneath them. Instead, she looked at Sarah with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. David? Victoria said, her voice like ice. We are leaving, now. She turned on her heel, walked carefully down the wooden steps, and got back into the passenger seat of the Mercedes. She didn't look back once. David glared at Sarah. The illusion of the wealthy, generous bride was gone, replaced by a desperate liar. Don't call me! He spat. He turned, walked to the driver's side, and got in. The engine roared to life. David, wait! Sarah screamed, running down the steps. She grabbed the door handle, but he locked it. The SUV reversed quickly, tires spinning on the gravel, and sped off down the private road, leaving Sarah standing alone in a cloud of dust. She stood there for a long time. Then she turned slowly and marched back up the steps, her face twisted in anger. Are you happy? She yelled. You destroyed my wedding. You humiliated me. You humiliated yourself. I said, my tone completely flat. I was done. There was no more anger left in me, only a deep, settling exhaustion. I am changing the locks this afternoon. Furthermore, the remaining $30,000 I had set aside in my account for your wedding is gone. I am no longer funding any part of your life. Sarah stared at me, waiting for me to soften. She waited for the maternal guilt to kick in for me to apologize and offer to fix it. I didn't. I just held out my hand one last time. She threw the keychain into the dirt at my feet. Find your own ride back to the city, I told her. I stepped back inside and closed the heavy oak door. A month passed. The grand, expensive wedding was quietly canceled. The Sterling family, deeply embarrassed by the ordeal, refused to pay for a large event. From what Helen told me, Sarah and David ended up eloping at a courthouse, though the relationship was severely strained. I didn't attend. I wasn't invited, and this time I truly didn't mind. On a Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. It was Sarah. She sounded tired, her fake accent completely gone. She told me David's parents had cut them off from the trust fund because of the embarrassment. They were trying to rent an apartment, but they needed a co-signer for the lease and a loan for the security deposit. She asked if I would help. No, I said. It was a complete sentence. I didn't offer excuses and I didn't engage in an argument. I simply told her that she was an adult now and she needed to build her own life the way her father and I had built ours. I wished her well and hung up the phone. I was standing on the porch of the lake cabin when I took the call. The weather had turned crisp and cool. After putting the phone in my pocket, I picked up a block of sandpaper. I had spent the last 2 weeks replacing the old weathered railings on the deck, doing the work myself, feeling the solid wood under my hands. There is a simple truth in construction. A foundation will only hold up the weight that is properly supported. If you build on lies, the structure will eventually collapse under its own stress. I blew the sawdust off the newly sanded rail and looked out over the water. The house was quiet. My bank accounts were secure. The keys were in my pocket. I had lost a certain version of my daughter, one I couldn't respect anyway, but I had reclaimed my dignity. I took a deep breath of the pine-scented air, picked up my tools, and got back to work.